Carcharodontosaurids were broken. Carcharodontosaurids ruled the Cretaceous landmass and evolved some of Earth's biggest land predators, rivaled only by the later tyrannosaurs. They include some of prehistory's most iconic theropod dinosaurs, from tiger-sized hunters like Lajasvenator to gigantic sauropod specialists like Mapusaurus. Their near-global distribution, tens of millions of years of rule, and apex predator adaptations made them one of the most successful theropod families in the entire Mesozoic. We're going to cover the Carcharodontosauridae in detail, going over each taxon's body size, phylogeny within the iconic family, and the physiological adaptations that made them the carnivore kings of much of the Cretaceous. What is a Carcharodontosaurid anyway? Paleontologist Altamirano defined the clade as including Carcharodontosaurus, of course, along with all taxa more closely related to Carcharodontosaurus, or Biggie Cheese to its friends, than to Allosaurus, Synraptor, Monolophosaurus, or Cryolophosaurus. Some simplified physical characteristics used to identify relationships include wrinkled enamel in the teeth, the square or Chad chin, rough textures on the top of the skull, and cervical or neck vertebrae with tall neural spines, as well as an opisthocoelous shape, meaning that the front part of the centrum forms a ball and the back part is concave. There are some other characters, of course, but these are some of the easiest to immediately identify. There are some iconic taxa that are in the group Carcharodontosauria that don't fall into the more exclusive Carcharodontosauridae, including Neovenator, Concavenator, and Chelantosaurus. Recent phylogenies have indicated that some genera originally thought to be Carcharodontosaurian in nature were actually tyrannosaurids, including Xiaoqilong and Labocania. Eocarcharia, with the name referencing how it was supposed to be one of the earliest Carcharodontosaurs, turned out to be a chimera of multiple unrelated theropods. The holotype was actually a Spinosaurid, so that's awkward. Some Carcharodontosaur bones are present, but they don't have a name yet. Onto the real ones. Taxa defined as part of Carcharodontosauridae according to the most recent and comprehensive phylogenies. These range from the Jurassic to the late Cretaceous, demonstrating a long family history of dominance. For size comparisons, we'll be using Chris Hemsworth Thor at 1.91 meters, along with Jerry the African bush elephant, 3.2 meters at the shoulder, for the bigger ones. Viteropristrosaurus milneri is the first Carcharodontosaurid known from the fossil record, and hails from the late Jurassic of Tendaguru, Tanzania. It lived in the same world as Jurassic classics like Allosaurus, Apatosaurus, and Stegosaurus, but was the herald of a radical reorganization of the apex predator hierarchy. It was comparable in size to many allosaurids of the time at 8 meters long and 1.6 tons based on the scrappy remains we have of it, and would have both hunted and scavenged along the sandy shoreline of the Tendaguru Formation. It likely dined on pterodactyloids, dryosaurids, and small sauropods like Dicraeosaurus. Awkwardly, a 2025 study found that its only unique skeletal characteristic is shared with another Carcharodontosaurid, Lajasvenator, so Viteropristrosaurus might be an invalid taxon entirely. Which brings us to, well, Lajasvenator. This Portuguese theropod survived a late Jurassic extinction into the early Cretaceous and is known from two specimens that together represent a decent chunk of the skeleton. It seems roughly polar bear sized based on those two specimens, with the larger individual at 7 meters long and weighing over a ton. It's worth mentioning that Lajasvenator isn't solidly inside the family Carcharodontosauridae. A 2024 analysis placed it there, but its original 2020 description had Lajasvenator as a non-Carcharodontosaurid Carcharodontosaur. If that turns out to be accurate, then both Lajasvenator and Viteropristrosaurus are out for the count in terms of this video, if they're even separate genera to begin with. Sauroniops, the Eye of Sauron itself, is an odd duck. Not a literal duck, more like an odd eyebrow. The holotype is incredibly fragmentary, but does seem to be diagnostic and definitely scales to an incredibly large predator, which seems appropriate for such an epic name. Now we just need a 15-meter tyrannosaur named Morgoth. The holotype of Sauroniops, a frontal bone, is highly thickened, which was suggested by Andrea Cow to represent an adaptation for headbutting. The most recent phylogenies that included Sauroniops, and I don't blame other teams for excluding it considering how scrappy it is, identified it as most similar to Carcharodontosaurus within Carcharodontosauridae. The same study referred another highly fragmentary specimen to the genus. Kilmaeosaurus is known from better material than Sauroniops, but not by much. Unfortunately, Carcharodontosaurs in general are not typically blessed with good material. It lived sometime between 140 and 100 million years ago. The wide range comes from imprecise dating methods not having survived as a species that long. It's only known from a single specimen after all. Due to its fragmentary nature, its precise position within the theropod family tree is fairly uncertain, although most recent phylogenies seem to indicate it's a proper Carcharodontosaurid. take that with a grain of salt. Lajasvenator is much more clearly defined as a carcharodontosaurid, which is interesting given it's from the very early Cretaceous. The material isn't too bad either, with bits of the skull along with significant preservation of the axial skeleton. It's much smaller than the animals you might immediately think of when you hear the word carcharodontosaurid, roughly comparable to a large tiger, which indicates it was targeting much smaller prey than its giant relatives later on. Even the shark dragons of South America had humble beginnings. Detonglong might be a megaraptorid, which arguably might be even cooler than being a carcharodontosaurid. You can start fighting in the comments now. It's fragmentary, and with every new phylogenetic analysis seems to swap between Carcharodontosauridae and Megaraptora with not much else to say about it, unfortunately. Megaraptorans are my second favorite theropod clade, so I'm always down to gain a new member of the club, but Carcs, I will admit, are close third. It's a win in my book either way. Acrocanthosaurus is a win in anyone's book. At least the book of anyone who's literate. Acrocanthosaurus is a heavily built, sail-backed carcharodontosaurid that dominated Cretaceous North America tens of millions of years before the tyrannosaurids showed up. It survived for approximately 25 million years and was spread all across what is now the contiguous United States, from Texas to Oklahoma to Maryland. It's known from 5 specimens, which altogether provide a great overview of the animal's anatomy and proportions. Acro's arms were long and powerful, with hooked claws capable of gripping prey during feeding. Its lower jaw was downturned, which may have increased its effective gape while biting large prey like sauropods. The degree to which its tall neural spines held muscle is unknown. Some models restore it with a thin sail, like a shorter version of what Spinosaurus had going on, while others see the neural spines as support for a huge hump like a bison's, and indicate that soft tissue levels for dinosaurs in general were higher than typically reconstructed. Acrocanthosaurus even has its own international holiday, Acrocanthosaurus Appreciation Day, celebrated every November 11th since 2020. You're welcome. Tamaryraptor used to be Carcharodontosaurus. Unfortunately, the material was bombed to crap, which is why I gave it 1 star. The actual material is worth 2 stars, but I took 1 off since it's only known from photographs now. It was redescribed based on those photos in 2025 and given its own genus and species, Tamaryraptor markgraffi. It typically clades within Carcharodontosauridae, sometimes outside of Carcharodontosauridae, the super-ultra exclusive club, and sometimes inside of it, as Carch proper's closest relative. Whatever its evolutionary relationships may have been, Tamaryraptor was certainly one of the most powerful land predators of Cretaceous North Africa. At 10 meters and 4+ tons, it could have taken down small sauropods. The coolest thing about Tamaryraptor is its nasal horn, whose function is currently unknown. I love not knowing things about paleontology because it opens up so many more interesting questions for us to explore. Carcharodontosaurus equidensis doesn't really have much going for it these days. Described in 2007 as another species of Carcharodontosaurus, much of its material has since been determined to belong to Spinosaurus mirabilis, although the holotype is still Carcharodontosaurid. An upcoming paper by Charlie Schrerer's team plans to rename the creature with a new genus name, so keep an eye out for that. Onto the Carcharodontosauridae, those carcs most closely related to Carcharodontosaurus itself. That, logically, includes Big E Cheese itself. It was first known from some of its teeth found in Algeria in the 1920s, but didn't receive a proper scientific name until 1931 when more of its material was found. Oh wait, that material turned out to be Tamaryraptor. Our current understanding of Carcharodontosaurus is from a partial skull that matched the original teeth. The skull was named its neotype, which replaced the holotype as the defining specimen since the original turned out to be Tamaryraptor. Confused yet? So am I. Carch might be messy, but that hasn't stopped it from being recognized as one of the most iconic theropod dinosaurs hands down. It lived alongside Spinosaurus and was the apex predator on land, likely feeding on sauropods and other large terrestrial prey. Its exact body size is of course unknown, given how we only have a partial skull, but comparisons with other large Carcharodontosaurians indicate that Big E Cheese was one of the biggest of the bunch, consistently over 8 tons. Higher end estimates indicate it might be the biggest, but I'd hesitate to give it that title until we find, post-crania. Carcharodontosaurus actually serves as the heavy cavalry for Carthage in my book Extinction Obsidian Dawn, which is available now in hardcover and ebook. Taravenator violante, the bull hunter of Violante's farm, was originally known only from a single post-orbital that showed some similarities with various large theropods from the area. More remains from the same site were described in 2024, and although they didn't overlap with the holotype, were assigned to Taravenator based on location and size, as well as physical characteristics that indicated a big Carcharodontosaurid identity. It was from the same formation as Mapusaurus and Meraxes while being older than Mapu and younger than Meraxes, potentially indicating a 3-step series of big carcs in the area. Taravenator's sweet post-orbital bosses protrude like horns, hence the name Bull Hunter. It was large, at approximately 6 tons according to volumetric models, and would have hunted young titanosaurs and Rabacosaurids. Within the Carcharodontosauridae are the gigantosaurini, 4 carcs that are more closely related to one another than they are to any other Carcharodontosaurid. Meraxes gigas is the first we'll talk about, and it lives up to its menacing name. This 6+ ton carnivore is known from actually pretty good material, and has the now infamous iliac dip that gives it the look of a cheese wheel missing a slice. Its skull is fairly basic for a carcharodontosaur, with thickened nasals and postorbitals. Meraxes sported a wicked dromaeosaur-like sickle claw on its feet that could have been used for prey restraint while feeding, making it perhaps the most metal of all carcharodontosaurs. Tyrannotitan's name is even cooler though, meaning Tyrant Titan. Known from multiple specimens that range between 5 and over 7 tons, it's one of the most physically powerful land predators in the history of the world, and terrorized early Cretaceous Argentina. It's wild how quickly Carcharodontosaurids became enormous after the Jurassic extinction. After Allosaurus and the big megalosaurids like Torvosaurus went extinct, Carcharodontosaurids hugely surpassed them within 30 million years. Tyrannotitan itself may have specialized as a waterside ambush predator, lying in wait for large herbivores who needed the critical resource before jumping out behind cover and ruining their day. Maybe even their week. Mapusaurus is yet another giant member of the Gigantosauridæ. Determining its precise size is difficult given how it's known from a bone bed composed of at least 9 specimens, with most of them being rather small potential subadults and 3 being rather large potential adults. Whether or not that bone bed represents a form of gregariousness is up for debate. The fact that they were mixed age, representing nearly a growth series, indicates to me that it likely was some type of social grouping, but what do I know? I'm just a dude on YouTube. Hunting in packs certainly would have been advantageous if you lived in the same environment as the 97-ton Argentinosaurus, the largest land animal known from the fossil record. The final member of the Gigantosauridæ, and its namesake, is Giganotosaurus carolinei itself, the giant southern lizard. Despite having pretty excellent material for a Carcharodontosaurid, with about 70% of the skeleton preserved, it only ever received a bare-bones description. 31 years ago, as of the time of this video's recording, which is honestly insane considering how this is the dinosaur that's been propped up in popular culture as some sort of rival to the megastardom of Tyrannosaurus rex. Still, the bones of the holotype have been 3D scanned by one of my friends, and images of them are publicly available online, which allows you to learn more about its proportions and measurements than anything the scientific literature could give you. The true scale of the Giga holotype is not a story the Jedi would tell, but it's one that I would, so feel free to take a look at the skeleton for yourself with the link in the pinned comment. A formal redescription is coming at some point in the future from Rodolfo Coria, which will be a day for celebration across all creation. Now that you have an overview of the various members of the Carcharodontosauridae, let's take a closer look at the physiological adaptations that made them so successful. One of the most obvious is size. Carcharodontosaurids include in their esteemed ranks some of prehistoric Earth's biggest land carnivores, with a total of 8 megatheropods in the family. Megatheropods are theropods with a maximum body mass of 5,000 kilograms or more. That makes Carcharodontosaurids the family with the most megatheropod members, double that of the Tyrannosaurids, who sit in second place with 4. But Carcharodontosaurids didn't start out as giants, although even the smaller members like Lajasvenator are still enormous by modern standards. Being able to succeed across a wide range of body sizes increases a species' ability to function as a generalist, not overly relying on one specific prey type. The earlier, smaller carcs still had the long skulls and reinforced chins of later builds, indicating that their increased gapes and strong lower jaws were effective against small prey first, and then also happened to work great against larger herbivores. Some traits scale up without issues, and the Carcharodontosaurid body plan is one of them. Speaking of jaws, the biting style of Carcharodontosaurids is one of their greatest weapons. Their lower jaws articulated with the upper part of their skull further back than many other theropods, letting them open their mouths wider than their relatives and competitors were physically capable of. This combined with elongated skulls made the front portion of their jaws open and close incredibly quickly, taking advantage of a lever action build. Their teeth were thin, sharp, and serrated, relying on their cutting edge rather than brute force in order to pierce flesh. Think of them like the cookie-cutter sharks of theropods, capable of quickly slicing large chunks of muscle out of animals bigger than they are and inducing blood loss and shock. Causing that much initial damage would make it easier to continue the attack, whether the victim be an elephant-sized ornithopod or a sauropod the size of a building. Of course, in order to properly harvest the meat those Grim Reaper jaws will give you access to, you need to be able to lift and eat the meat you bite. A 2011 biomechanics study calculated that a 6-ton Carcharodontosaurus had neck muscles strong enough for the animal to hold 424 kilograms of meat in its jaws at a time, the equivalent of a large tiger. Larger individuals would of course be able to support more weight, and recent discoveries related to Carcharodontosaurid neck function may indicate adaptations that would bring the limit even higher, at least for Giganotosaurines. Tarvenator violante's neck had imbricated or overlapping cervical spines that were widened at the top, likely providing structural support skeletally as well as additional space for muscle attachments. A less extreme cervical complex is found in Giganotosaurus. This would allow them to stiffen their necks and lift greater weights, increasing both the amount of meat they could tear from carcasses and the size of prey they could simply lift off the ground and execute on the spot. Their relatively lightweight skulls, combined with the ball and socket joints connecting their head and neck, allowed Carcharodontosaurs to move their head from side to side quickly. That adaptation was perfect for snapping at the hindquarters or tails of fleeing herbivores and dealing significant damage with an opportunity attack, a strategy enhanced by the high stability of these ancient apex predators. They weren't particularly agile, with smaller muscle attachments on their legs than some other theropod groups, but were built for staying in one place and resisting being toppled by their extremely large prey. They were incredibly well adapted for hunting sauropods. They didn't need to be fast, but stable. They didn't need to crush bone, just tear through muscle and scales. Their femur-tibia ratios indicate they weren't adapted for high-speed running, but they didn't need to be when their ideal prey animal was a walking hill. But even with all those adaptations, taking down something like a 90-ton Argentinosaurus is a tall order. That's one reason why Mapusaurus is suspected to have either hunted cooperatively or engaged in Komodo dragon-style mobbing of the big sauropods, although I'd say it's likely they still would have focused on smaller and younger Argentinosaurus whenever possible. There's no sense in taking unnecessary risks when a 20 or 30-ton animal will feed the entire pack just as effectively. Parents may have demonstrated useful techniques for killing sauropods to their young, an idea that springs from how the Mapusaurus bone bed appears to be a mixed age group with individuals across nearly the entire ontogenetic spectrum. Speaking of ontogeny, Carcharodontosaurids may have adopted a slow and steady growth strategy, if histology of Meraxes gigas is anything to go by. The holotype was between its late 30s and early 50s when it died, with a consistent and slow growth rate throughout most of its life. That type of growth rate is called hypermorphosis, when the growth rate is fairly constant, but the time for which it grows extends for a longer period. Interestingly, recent insights into tyrannosaurid growth strategies indicate a similar lifespan and growth rate for Tyrannosaurus. Perhaps that was the norm for megatheropods, and the idea of growth rates being totally phylogenetically constrained is a thing of the past. Observing growth rates based on case-by-case histological examination, rather than filling in the gaps based on relatives that may have had completely different lifestyles, is the best practice anyway. Carcharodontosaurids were incredibly successful, starting out as medium-sized hunters and leveling up into specialized titan slayers that ruled the Middle Cretaceous. But specialization comes with a cost. For reasons not yet entirely understood, their main prey items began to dwindle and disappear, with the titanosaurs and Rabacosaurids vanishing from the South American and African environments that the Carcharodontosaurids had come to dominate so completely. By 89 million years ago, the last of the Carcharodontosaurids had vanished along with their gigantic prey, unable to pivot to medium-sized targets quickly enough to survive. Those smaller predator niches were already filled by Abelosaurids and Megaraptorans, which flourished in the power vacuum left behind by their giant competitors. But those clades deserve their own videos. What other animal groups would you like to see as a part of this series? So far I've covered pseudosuchians, elasmobranchs, and spiders, and I plan on doing a lot more dinosaur clades in the future as well. As I mentioned earlier, you can check out Extinction Obsidian Dawn to see Carcharodontosaurids in action as shock cavalry of the ancient world. Also, I apologize for my voice. I've been as sick as a sick dog for the last week and a half, so I might sound a little goobery. But the show must go on. I'm the Vividen, and I'll see you the next time I combine information about size, physiology, and phylogeny for a really dang cool group of animals, aka next weekend. See you then!